Yeah.
Okay, everyone, I'd like to call the Budget Advisory Commission meeting to order. So today is Thursday, October 13th, 2022. Just want to recognize, thanks to folks who showed up in person. This is our, well, technically our second in-person meeting for a while, but the first one, it was me and staff in the room. So I'm happy to see folks sitting around the table in real life. So welcome, and I'm looking forward to saying hello after the meeting. So first we will do the land acknowledgement, then we'll do roll call. So the land acknowledgement, and also I want to recognize we have, I think, a couple of our officials on Teams, and then if anybody of our members joins on Teams, then I will recognize them as well. So first we'll do our land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and the land. I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on the unceded land of the Dena'ina people and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of the land on which we all live. And then I'll also put a note about the Teams, even though we do have folks in person. Thank you for joining this virtual Teams meeting for those who are online. Please note that the Teams chat is not part of the audio recording of the work session or I should change it, our commission meeting. To make the audio record as complete as possible, comments should be stated into the record and not placed in the chat. If you would like to make a comment in the chat, the chair will ask you to state the comment in the record. So you can use that to be recognized or say I have a question, but just remember that's not part of our public record. So with that, I will turn it over to Lila for roll call.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
I'm here.
Mr. Flynn?
And he's excused. He said he wouldn't be here.
Ms. Hall? Present. Ms. Hobson?
And she says she will be late joining about noon.
Mr. Plowden?
Here.
Mr. Minor?
Here.
Oh, yeah.
Ms. Reese? Here. Mr. Tamani?
Here, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Minor. Yeah.
Ms. Warfield?
It sounds like she was excused.
Mr. Sam Kannathan?
Here.
That's everybody. Thank you.
And that means we have a quorum. So next we will move on to informational reports. And first the chair's report. So I am the chair of the commission. Not a lot of updates. I do want to note that we had some turnover of our membership. And so James Smallwood has resigned it was between last meeting and this one. And then also Rob Forbes also resigned since last meeting. So just to say we have, and we also have a new member, Mark. Please remember, remind me your last name.
Siam Panathan.
Siam. Okay.
Yep.
And so welcome.
Thank you.
And I believe that's it. Everything else we'll cover later in the agenda. So I will turn it over to our assembly member. I believe we have what's that bar line.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I need to leave after my presentation today due to some guard service. I have to go on base, but I'll just say briefly, and I think this probably will be repeated by the administration, but we have begun our budget process in earnest. We have our first work session tomorrow on the proposed budget by the mayor. For those that have seen it, the budget is largely a continuation budget. It's about $20 million larger than last year's budget. It's a $583 million, the operating budget is now. Of course, the Assembly hasn't had a chance to amend it in any way, but that's the mayor's proposal. So the first work session is tomorrow. And then we have a Budget Finance Committee meeting next Thursday. I should say the hearing tomorrow, the work session tomorrow is 11 to 4 p.m. in room 155. And then the Budget Finance Committee meeting is next Thursday at noon from also in room 155. And then there's another work session on that next Friday, which unfortunately I won't be able to attend again because of military service, but I'm sure my colleagues will be there. Then, of course, we will have at least two public hearings in November. And we usually have at least one and possibly more work sessions in November too to discuss amendments and any possible S version from the administration. And we will aim to pass the budget either the second meeting in November or the first meeting in December. In addition to that, at the last meeting, we passed 2 budget items that I had spoken about before at this commission, sponsored by myself and my co-chair of the Budget Finance Committee, Ms. Quinn Davidson, that appropriated about, well, first, it reduced the amount of ARPA funding we spent on beetle kill by $1 million, and transferred that to the general fund where it could be used for a federal match, because you can't match federal dollars to federal dollars. So that, and then the remaining ARPA funds that were freed up in that way, $350,000 was given to the Pacific, the Polynesian Association of Alaska and the Pacific Community of Alaska, both of which hadn't received funds in the last ARPA distribution. And so there's $650,000 that are now sort of freed up, and we will decide in the coming weeks what to do with those funds. And then in addition to the $1 million of additional beetle kill funds in the general fund, we also appropriated money to repair the Sullivan Arena, although those repairs obviously are on hold for a little while, at least some of them, so long as it's being used as an emergency shelter. And that's not because the emergency shelter damages the Sullivan in a significant way. As we've talked about here before, it turns out that most of the damage to the Sullivan needs to be repaired is from either the earthquake or just long-standing sort of neglect or failure to maintain over the years. The use of it as an emergency shelter does not appear to have done any significant structural damage. And then in addition to that, we passed about $800,000 for additional fuel costs for our departments, $300,000 for towing, because the APD had run out of towing funds. And then $1 million for a long-range transportation plan that will include right-of-way maintenance and snow removal improvement. And that was an amendment led by Ms. Zalatel and Mr. Volland, and will be led by municipal plan. And all of those additional spending comes within the surplus that I had mentioned here before, that was a result of additional state community assistance that we received that we weren't really expecting, and then a very unusually high rental car tax revenues rather this summer. So that's all I have for now. I'm happy to take any questions on that or anything else that we're up to at the Assembly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Does anybody have questions?
If you're in the room, please feel free to raise your hand. Looks like we're only right now.
Not for me.
Okay, I don't think there's any questions, so thank you for your report, and yeah, feel free to take off whenever you need to.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, and next we have the school board report. So I see we have, sorry, the Jim down there.
Andy.
Oh, Andy, okay, sorry, it's been so long. So please go ahead, Andy, and give your report. And sorry, we also have school board member Kelly Lessons online as well, but we'll start with Andy.
Hi, my name's Andy Ratliff. I'm the budget director for the Acres School District. Well, if you haven't met me, I'm just going to give you a brief update on where we're at with our school district budget and some of the things happening there. Last Tuesday, or not this past, a week ago from Tuesday, the school board passed an agenda item allocating the one-time money that we got from the state in this past legislative session, which included about $16.1 million in operating funds, $90 million or so in school bond debt reimbursement, and then another $9.5 million or so in major maintenance, kind of construction project related funding. The school board approved the operating funds to hold that over to help offset next year's deficit. So we'll use that as a use of fund balance for next year. And that essentially buys our deficit down to about 68 million is kind of the rough order of magnitude on that. They authorized $9.5 million to go into the security project or the capital projects as per the state intended on those. And then of the bond debt reimbursement, 7.4 million went into secure vestibule and security improvements at 7 elementary schools. About 38.5 million went on to target failing boilers, roofs, seismic upgrades, security cameras, and other safety projects. And then another $3 million for kind of ongoing, more of a minor maintenance. We need to replace flooring in schools or something like that. Not necessarily capital in nature, but these smaller items that are on the deferred maintenance list. Try to get some of that addressed. And then they left 37.7 million unallocated to revisit at the December 5th meeting. So that's where we're at with the one-time money, how we're going to spend that. As far as the budget preparation for next year goes, this coming Tuesday, we're going to have identify which schools are going to be identified for closure or repurposing for the following school year. We have a demographer who works this type of thing, like, several hundred times, like, to help facilitate what schools are going to be closed. And they look at a lot of things. They look at, first of all, is the capability of the surrounding schools. Can they receive these students? What condition is that building in? What are the demographics of the school year closing? Is like free and reduced? Is that going to change title status? Are there special programs like special education things that would need to be addressed at the receiving schools as well? So there's an expert who's helped facilitating that, and they'll give the presentation at the work session at 3 o'clock on Tuesday with the school board. So that's when the closures will be announced. After that, we'll follow up with town hall meetings for each individual school that's closed and all those communities to kind of round out the reasoning why and answer any questions that the communities might have. And aside from that, that's mostly going to be done as an efficiency standpoint. We don't end up saving a lot of money on these school closures. For the most part, the teachers and a lot of the staff follow the students, but we can save some staff, principals, nurses, librarians, kind of the things we have one per school at. But then we also eventually lose revenue because we get less money per student for larger schools. So there's kind of a sliding scale of what they call a school size factors. We math it out by each school. The smaller the school, the more money we get per kid. So as we consolidate, we get less money per student. And eventually after this, they have like a hold harmless clause in state statute that allows us to step down that adjustment over the course of 5 years. But after that's gone, we anticipate even losing a little bit of money. But it'll get, as far as the benefit for students, larger schools offer a lot more flexibility in how they can do their schedules, particularly at high schools where they can offer more electives and different types of electives there. And elementary schools, it reduces the number of combo classes by having just more students in the building overall. So that's where we're at. December, we'll put out what we call our Proforma Budget, which is essentially a continuation, say, here's how much it's going to cost to do what we're doing now next year, and here's how much revenue we anticipate bringing in and what the real budget gap is. The 68 million was estimated based on current or enrollment projections for this year. So now that we have our current enrollment, and we'll base our pro forma budget on our more current projections. So 68 million was really, here's what we're doing now, add inflation to it, and then how much revenue we expect for the exact same amount of kids as we had projected for this year. So it was a rough estimate that we did at the beginning of the school year, and hope to refine that in December. And then as we go in and start building our budget for FY24. But yeah, those are the big things we got going on. There's every couple of weeks, we've been identifying different areas of potential reduction, or just identify or let the board know how much things cost, like how much the Ignite programs costs, the immersion programs, sports, things like that. Just these kind of things that we do in our daily business. We don't really talk about as much in terms of as cost, but in the budget discussion of things where we're going to have to make pretty significant reductions, let the board know, here's how much these individual things cost and what's happening in schools. But that's what I have, and I'll let Ms. Lessons jump into and add anything that she has to that.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate that chance. You sort of stole my thunder, at least all of the most noteworthy items. I want to say that the administration and the finance team has been working very, very hard to really backwards plan from when we need to prepare this budget. So the conversation has been longstanding, ongoing, very thorough, And I appreciate everything that Andy and Jim and a lot of other support staff have done to help make this conversation as uncomfortable as it is, as transparent as it has been. So yes, the upcoming work session at 3 o'clock on Tuesday will be something that a lot of folks are going to want to pay attention to. I was talking with a couple of community councils last night, and from the board's perspective, this is really like a terrible, would you rather situation. Will we rather cut X or cut Y? We know we have to bring that fiscal cliff down. So I'm not looking forward to the process. I think that there are a lot of wonderful programs that we have that improve our student outcomes, but the reality is that we're here at this fiscal cliff because of years of flat funding, inflationary drivers, declining birth rates. The presentation that we received last week was pretty eye-opening. People are having fewer babies. We've lost families to outmigration, young people. So unless some of these larger demographic changes are altered in some way, we do need to plan for a smaller school district. So we've heard about immersion. What does immersion cost? We've heard about shifting all middle schools to a 6 through 8 model. That would also likely entail ending 6th grade band and orchestra because you would be doing something else with those 6th graders. We've heard about the cost of the middle school model. When Andy spoke about the cost of student sports, it turns out that different sports have different costs. Hockey, swimming, and gymnastics have significantly higher per student costs, over $1,000 per student when you compare it to cross-country running. So high school sports cost the district about $4.4 million, but take in $675,000 in revenue. So, I personally think there's a lot of wonderful things about student athletes, right? And they improve, being a part of that team can improve student engagement and improve their outcomes. But this is, when we look at what's going to have to be cut, everything's going to be on the table. We've looked at ASD virtual. It's my understanding that, we will also have closer looks at some of the administrative expenses, school start times. Everything has a cost. And so this is an ongoing conversation. The other thing I would add is that at yesterday's finance meeting, we heard for the first time a proposal for a spring 2023 bond. And the board heard voters last spring. We had proposed a very large 2-year bond. And over the next couple of weeks, as we move towards what we call our action items when we vote in November, it would be an action item approving a 2023 bond. This bond would be a 1-year bond at about $37 million if nothing changes. There are about 10 schools on the bond with an impact to about 4,500 students kind of per year. And they focus, a lot of these things are nuts and bolts, seismic improvements, leaky roofs. There's some ADA accessibility items. So this will be detailed as a non-action item at our upcoming meeting. So I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, and thank you again, Andy. So I'll ask if folks have questions, and then I'll start out with one as people are thinking, and it's so I don't live in the neighborhood, or I don't have kids in Inlet View, but I know that's been a big discussion. So and we could probably take the whole meeting just to talk about that, but I was just curious if a decision has been made about that, and then also I was curious if it hasn't yet. Kelly, what your position is, but also if the administration has taken a position on that as well.
Sure. So the short answer is that there is no decision. As Andy mentioned, there was a motion. It was my motion, but it was essentially tabled until December, early December, to really wait. A number of board members were valued having additional information about proposed school closures in the meantime. And so that's the official answer, is that no decision has been made because we did not vote on it. My stance is complicated, but it comes down to this is one-time funding The entire allocation that we made at the last meeting was one-time funding from the state that allows us to address critical infrastructure needs. And Inlet View is a large expense. It is an old building. I see it, if we think about Anchorage in 20, 30, 40 years from now, I think we need to have a highly functional, up-to-date school downtown Anchorage. We may be experiencing population declines right now. This is my personal stance. This is not the stance of the board, but I see Anchorage in the future as a place where climate refugees are going to be coming. And I think that building a new school, especially a high-performing school, it's our only IB program in that downtown area. It addresses critical student safety needs in the immediate future, and it creates a better Anchorage for the generations to come. So by using one-time funds for this one-time project earlier rather than later, and not putting the onus on Anchorage taxpayers, but using these one-time state funds, I think that is a higher value use of these funds than, quite frankly, than offsetting the fiscal cliff that we have right now. These funds are fungible. We could allocate them to lowering next year's fiscal cliff. But my personal stance here is that doing so takes a lot of the pressure off the legislators for just the first, for another year. And then we've gone and we've used $37 million to lower class sizes only a little bit, because they would actually be going up still. So I don't think we would have anything lasting if we were to allocate it towards this fiscal cliff. The fiscal cliff is here right now. We've allocated $56.5 million to it towards our PTR, pupil to teacher ratios this year. So the cliff is here. It has been masked by our federal funds. They are expiring, and I would rather see Anchorage get something lasting than allocating one-time funds to an ineffective pupil to teacher ratio for one more year. So that's my personal stance. And I'm sure every other board member has their own stance.
Sure. Andy, briefly, and then if there's any other questions.
Yeah, I think, the administration is certainly in agreement that that facility is in disrepair, and, if nothing else, it does need rebuild, right? It's old. It is on the 6-year capital improvement plan. You will see that also going to the school board. I believe that's going to go on Tuesday as well. And it's on our FY24 bonding plan for that. But assuming, that also assumes the bond gets passed. So it's, that's what the administration is. We did kept it on the capital improvement plan, and, certainly understand the need to have it rebuilt.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, I saw Mark and then, yeah.
Sure. So, couple questions. One, my understanding is that the IB program at the elementary level, this may be probably the first and only in the world for IB, because typically that's at the high school level. Am I correct?
I don't know if it's the first and only in the world. I think it's my understanding that it's the only one in the state of Alaska. It's certainly the only one in Anchorage, and I don't know of any others in the state of Alaska. But I know that when it was certified, it was a big deal. They worked very hard to achieve that certification.
Yeah. And the second question is, what are the chances of, assuming that we do end up keeping the IB program, can it be transferred to another school the way we have the immersion programs?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. And Andy, do you have a sense of the transferability?
I'm sure we could keep the program, but move it to a different facility if we were to move the school. It's just a matter of going through I don't know what the application process would entail, but I can't imagine it would be too onerous. It does cost, in the IB program, the other thing is it's not free. It does cost us about $100,000 a year to maintain that through the certifications, the trainings, and then the additional staff that's required for it.
Thank you. One question?
Yeah, my question is, I was curious, a general update on the bus driver shortage, but also what are the budgetary impacts of the shortage of bus drivers for the school district? What does that look like from a budget perspective?
So we're still very short on bus drivers. We're adding a few more every week. As tourist season starts winding down, we start to get more applicants, I think. But last I checked, there was around 50 or so, 50 plus drivers between our ASD and our contracted with Reliant. About 2/3 Reliant, probably, and 1/3 of ours, which is about the same split on our routes. As far as the budgetary impact of that, we do save money by not running the buses. We expect to have some positive change within our transportation fund. However, we've been buying a lot of other stuff and having to pay addenda for people, new crossing guards or teachers to go out there and direct traffic when we're not running the buses. So there is an added cost to it, but it's not to the extent that we're saving money by not running routes. So expect it to be a net positive for the financial piece. Not good for the kids, but for the finances, a little better.
Any other questions, Carolyn? And then Rachel. Oh, good.
Do you have an approximate range of the potential job loss based on how many schools end up being closed? And that, it sounds pretty fluid, but do you have just an approximate range?
So for an elementary school, let's see, it would be mostly a principal, a nurse, a librarian, 2 office staff, BPO, and a night custodian. So maybe 7 or 8 per school, I would think. And then, maybe, I don't know how many schools are actually going to be on the final proposal, but if it's 5 schools, 40 positions that certainly have enough openings to be able to accommodate. And so people won't actually lose jobs on just the closure aspect, but overall reductions, there's potential for pink slips still. But the teaching staff and the TAs, those would all follow the students.
I have one more minute before I have to go to another meeting. If there's any question.
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel. So you said that if you close the schools, you might repurpose the building. Are we still going to be on the hook for the costs? I mean, you can't just let a building sit, fall into disrepair. That has a
Right.
higher cost.
And like a repurposement, might be for like a academy somewhere where we centralize preschool services, or it could be turned over to a charter school like Alaska Native is in currently East High School, which is not ideal. In those instances, I believe we would be on the hook for the capital cost and whatever maintenance of those facilities. Yes.
Okay, so I have a follow-on question to that. For homeschooling, like I'm a homeschool parent. I have a lot of friends that are homeschool parents. We don't use King Tech because their fees are unreasonable. There's no perceived value there. Have you done a total look to, I know lowering costs when you're talking about a deficit seems counterintuitive, but if you can kind of bring things down to a more perceived value, because you've been losing students at record rates. I think we're at the lowest enrollment we've been in decades. You might draw some of that business back through charter fees.
Lowering rates for like King Tech.
Or any other program that ASD is offering. And I know the charter school I use won't rent an ASD facility because the rents are higher to rent from ASD than on the commercial market. So if you were to right size your fees, you'd lose the money up front, but you might gain long-term revenue because, I mean, let's be honest, schools are the heart of the community. When you have bad schools, you don't get business investment, and that affects the city.
Right, but by state statute, we can't rent our facilities to charter schools. They can only be charged the actual cost of operations and maintenance. So if you look at Aquarian is the only district charter school that's in a district facility. So they do not pay us rent. They pay their own utilities and like some minor maintenance costs, snow plowing, things like that. But we're on the hook or the board voted for capital improvements of almost $7 million to put on for roof and boiler upgrades, I think. So the precedent's kind of been set for providing, if it's a district-owned facility, providing the capital upkeep. But no, if there's a charter school in an ASD facility, we can't actually charge them.
Okay, I'll have to get clarification from them what they meant by fees. It is a general statement, but then have you had a serious conversation? I hear a lot of talks about cuts, but nobody's talking about right sizing to redraw business, right? You want to re-engage students, you're losing money because enrollment's down, right? That's not helping.
Partly, well, and then just the inflation that we have and just our normal cost of business. And I kind of use the example, all things, if we lose 100 kids throughout the district of, 43,000, that's about, it's about $10,000 a kid, $1 million, let's say. You can cut maybe 5 or 6 teachers or so that are directly related to those 100 students, assuming 20 to 25 kids per class. So you can make those reductions, but you lose $1 million, you can only save about $600,000 in cost by reducing the direct staff. To that, in 100 kids, like that's 1 per school maybe. So it's really just this kind of this bigger pie you got to look at. And then, you can't cut a principal by 1 student out of everything. You can't, it just doesn't work that way. So when we're talking about losing kids and we also lose the funding to go along with it. But and then we still have the inflationary component on the rest of it. So if we have a $600 million budget, now even if we could cut the $1 million worth of stuff related to the $1 million of revenue we lost, we still have inflation on that other $599 million that we're trying to deal with. And not having a base student allocation increase since 2017 has really been, that's just built up the structural deficit we have, and we've been covering with one-time funds, or more recently, the federal stimulus one-time funds that are in much greater amount than we have in fund balance or ever received from the state as one time.
Yeah, we can talk after, because I don't want to take up the meeting, but I'm not focusing on cuts. I'm focusing on efficiencies and creative solutions to avoid cuts and to draw business in other creative ways if you're not getting traditional involvement. So, okay, yeah.
I'm certainly open to ideas.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the discussion. Sorry, I'm going to move us along just because we have plenty of other things on the agenda, but it sounds like there's a work session next Tuesday at 3 p.m. And so for folks who are interested, I would encourage you to attend or watch that afterwards. And yeah, certainly there's going to be a big focus on the school budget in the next couple of months. And Kelly Lessons had also put in the chat, and maybe Lila, you can send that out afterwards. It's just a website. It's the asdk12.org/FY24. And she said that's where all of the budget information discussions are. So that's a good resource for folks. So with that, we will move on to our last report, which is from OMB staff. So go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Courtney Peterson, the Director of Office of Management and Budget, for those that I haven't met. So nice to meet you. I am going to go over our budget versus actuals first before I get into the 2023 budget. So this is the monthly report that we send to the assembly. We are reporting the status of everybody's budget versus actuals through September at this point. Kind of our benchmark right now is whether they're plus or minus 5%, where we are through the year. And right now we're not seeing any individuals that are actually over the 5% through the year. Which is good to see. We have some people that are trending right on, really close to where we are. So our departments are doing a very good job in managing. As Mr. Dunbar said, they did allocate some funding to police for some towing, and then also some fuel money that we'll distribute through some departments that have already exceeded their fuel budgets. We've seen some record high fuel prices this year. They came down through the summer, but it's not looking good. And as we get into the winter months, I'm sure everyone noticed the white stuff flying the other day. So we expect to see that, we'll have a couple of departments that, those fuel costs are gonna probably ramp up in the next couple of months. So we'll utilize that funding that we got from the assembly, which we greatly appreciate, and then continue to have the departments manage their budgets to come on budget, because that is one of the bases for us to stay in a good financial position at the end of the year, is for everyone to stay in budget so that we're not having to try to make up or cover any fund balance uses or overspend. So.
And I'll just pause really quickly
Yep.
just to recognize that member Lizzie Hobson as well. So make sure she knows for tennis. And go ahead.
Yeah, nope, and so that's where we are right now. Does anybody have any questions on the overall or like specifically to any of their departments as far as the budget to actuals?
I've got one if I could.
Yeah.
In past years, there's often been, like the fire department, especially will have, and, you know, it's overtime budget can be sometimes a little bit unpredictable and come in kind of hot. How is fire looking for the current year?
So right now they are looking on this report, they're looking like they're gonna be in budget. However, one of the things that we do, and I like to point it out because we're management and budget, so we like to focus on the management side first. And so what we do is we go out to the departments and work on their year-end projections, you know, like, okay, this is what you're looking like, but with the business, the way you're trending, how are you going to end the year? And so what we have for them is they're looking okay, but by the end of the year, they expect to be over. And that's part of what we'll be managing and where that fuel is part of their situation and going over. And then they have some other areas, but we're working with them to manage those and bring that number hopefully down inside of their budget as much as possible. So right now, it's not looking like they're gonna go over, but they are projecting that there is a strong possibility that they will. Where that number lands, you know, we're trying to make sure it's as small as possible. Yep.
Any other questions?
I was wondering if you can hand me, a copy of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we can get copies. Yep,
Yeah, that'd be fine.
okay.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. We can move on.
All right.
Yes.
And so for the 2023 budget, I just want to take you through kind of a real overarching, where to access the budget, kind of where you can find things in it. We have, as Mr. Dunbar pointed out during his report, we do have a work session tomorrow from 11 to 4. I know it's a long time, so you might not be able to do it, but it is recorded, so it will be available. So, whenever you want some background noise, you can pull that up and kind of listen to it in your free time. But we will go through, tomorrow we will go through the majority of the general government operating capital and alcohol tax funds. And then next Friday's work session is scheduled from 11 to 3. We'll finish up the general government departments, and then we'll go through the utility and enterprise funds at the end of that meeting. So that's kind of how those two are broken up. So from the muni.org site, if you go to management and budget, we have the 2023 budget posted on our homepage. So you don't even have to go any further than this. And so we have the proposed general government operating budget, the capital budget, and municipal enterprise and utility budgets. So if you want to look at all of them, if you're only interested in the departments maybe that you guys have chosen, all three of the books are out here for viewing. When you go into the general government operating budget, we actually have it where you can click on this link and it's the entire book in one document. It's large. So if there's specific things that you're looking for, we also have it what we would call section by section. So if you're only interested in a specific department, they're all listed here and you can select any of them and then we'll have the information. The overview has some very good information if you're looking for an overarching analysis of the revenues, the expenses, what has happened over the last year, how we came up with the budgets that we were. The administration was focused on a continuation budget and making sure that the services we continue to the public. So a high emphasis on police and fire, adding some prosecutor funding because we're seeing that so we're seeing that a large amount of our prosecutors are choosing to work for the state because they have increased by about 20% their funding for their attorneys at the state level. And in the last month, we've seen 6 attorneys leave our staff. And so in order to stay competitive in that market, we're adding some money to our municipal attorney department to address that situation. So you'll see those items in the budget. If you're looking at a department's kind of section and you just kind of want to see an overview of what happened in their budget, what you can do is each department has their org structure on here. Then they have kind of about the department. It tells you, you know, the programs they're running. And then it goes into their department budget. The fire department has some extra information for you. This is very high level information, these reports. It's great. But these, what we call the reconciliation pages, are in every single department section, and it summarizes those details. So if you kind of just want to get into the gist of what happened with each department, these would be the pages I would recommend viewing. And it literally takes you from the revised budget to the proposed budget, and it tells you exactly line by line what happened. So you can get into the details even further if you go through this section. There's reports by division and things like that, but this is kind of the summary page. So again, if you're going through this, it is a large document. There's some very good information in there, but if you're just looking to kind of time management, I would recommend viewing these pages. And then as you go through them, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them out to us and we can answer those. And again, these are the pages that we will be going through at our work session with the assembly. So this is kind of the picture that we show them and talk through those changes for each department.
Okay. Courtney.
Yeah.
And so I'll also add for, especially because a lot of us are newer members and may not have gone through a budget cycle before. So one is just a reminder, you know, we're the Budget Advisory Commission. So this is obviously within our purview, but we have no formal, you know, step in the approval process. So there's no, you know, we don't have to take a vote on anything. However, we often have, or at least since I've been on, have taken a position, not necessarily, you know, support or oppose the budget, but maybe if we have recommendations or, you know, something we'd like to see more of, or, you know, could be specific, it could be general, like your comment about the wage increases, for example, just hypothetically, that could be something to say, we should look at other departments. So our timeline is we have today's meeting. We really encourage folks to watch those work sessions, you know, on your own time if you can't do it live. 5 hours is a lot. So please do that. And then a little bit later, we'll talk about our schedule, but essentially just to put in folks' minds, the process is now that the budget's out. As Member Dunbar said, the assembly will go through their review process, prepare amendments, those things, and then typically vote in late November on the budget. And so that means our next meeting of this group, Thursday, November 10th, would be our opportunity, if we want to take any kind of position or make recommendations or vote on anything in time for it to go to the assembly for consideration. So just to say, if we wait until December, it would probably be too late. And so what we're looking at is hopefully a work session where after folks have had a chance to review the budget, we can ask some questions. And then if we wanted to, you know, again, it's up to the group, but if we wanted to make any recommendations for a vote, then it would be at that November 10th meeting. And so, you know, probably talking about some of those things at a work session and then drafting you know, typically we do resolutions, like we have one on our agenda today. So just to say that's been our process. And of course, we aren't required to do any of that. So if we have, if we don't have consensus or we don't have agreement about recommendations, or we, you know, don't feel strongly enough to make any, then our process would really just be reviewing the budget. And then of course, individual members, you know, we're all members of the public. And so we can always provide information or provide that position statement personally as well. So what we're talking about is the group, the Budget Advisory Commission, taking any kind of action. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions, maybe not so much on the content, but if you have questions on process, or if you do have additional questions, if you've had a chance to look at the budget.
I had a couple, I mean, it's just kind of a general informational question. When I went and met with Fire and Public Works, I haven't been to Parks and Rec yet, we're still like ships in the night. But, when I spoke with them, the common theme that I'm seeing is they are falling behind because they have to do massive equipment replacement. Large scale, very expensive, and it's a total replacement. With the fire, it's because their vendor was going out of business, and they have rigs that are aging out. They can't replace parts, they have to replace them. There's no vendor to support that long-term maintenance. And then with Public Works, it's the same thing. You know, the supply chain is also being affected by scarcity.
Yep.
And then changing in the way they do contracting, commercial rates.
Yep.
Is that all being worked into 2023, or is that being nickel and dime for the next 10 years? Is there a plan for that?
So the fleet replacement situation has kind of been ongoing for a few years. And then with the supply chain issues that have come up in the last 2 years have really significantly changed that. And so we are addressing it as much as possible. We're planning for increasing the replacement as much as we can annually. The problem is the supply chain now. And so even if we wanted to push the money there in large
Nowhere to
scale.
spend it.
Exactly. And so that's where we're seeing is that we can only go so far right now until those supply chain things kind of open up a little bit more. It used to take, I think they were saying about a year to get a fire truck, and now they're saying 18 to 24 months in order to get one. And so even like getting the money towards those things, we're not seeing an actual like tangible vehicle or equipment come in for a couple of years. And the other issue is that some of the manufacturers are not opening up for government sales. And so even though we want to purchase things, we can't because they're not opening it up for us to do that. And so it is a balancing act of trying to address those issues and get our fleet replaced and our equipment purchased with how much can we actually acquire and get here. So it is always something that we're talking about when we talk about budget, because I think one of the things that the people know about the most is kind of the police car situation and, you know, and the replacement of those. But it is across the entire municipality. And so we have to
I was
look
gonna
at.
ask.
Yeah.
If it's in just those two, it's gotta be everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just wondering if we're setting money aside so when opportunities arise, we can take them and we're not like, wish we could.
Yeah, no, we continue to do that. So we don't not allocate the funding out just because we can't get it, but also understanding that, you know, we don't have to push as much extra money out right now because it's not an availability of it. So again, it's that balancing act of the right size of how much money can we actually use right now? And then how much can we set aside for the next year and do the same thing and just kind of slowly get that as many as we can. So, yes.
Do you have a thinking on, depreciation schedule
For the fleet?
and the fire
And
the police cars?
So we pay cash for our fleet and we don't base it on depreciation. So the depreciation functions on the accounting level, like on the books, but we don't hold back cash based on depreciation in order to, replace, say, 10, 15, 20 years. We actually have a cash disbursement from general government to our fleet fund annually that we use, and that's what purchases our fleet replacement.
So about 15 years ago, I worked with the Department of Defense and introduced them to the concept of infrastructure as a service for their whole command control system. Have we looked at implementing methodologies like that for some of our capital equipment, like even with the fire engines and with police cars.
Like, can you give me an example?
So in the past, all of the network communications equipment that the Department of Defense had, they had to buy. And so they, as technology shifted, they couldn't necessarily, they didn't have it in their budget to be able to upgrade the equipment because, you know, when hackers came up with new ways, because it hadn't been, in quotes, depreciated
Yeah,
yet on their books.
yeah,
And so what we ended up doing was bringing the cell phone model to the whole communication infrastructure, where the government has cell phone. They don't care what the towers are or what the switches are, as long as the call goes from point A to point B and the orders are able to be transmitted, everyone's happy. And so it's now on someone else to be responsible for making sure that there is the uptime, for making sure that everything is properly maintained, for making sure that any upgrades, any new technologies that come out to keep the Chinese from hacking it, all that was now what they call 5 nines was now the responsibility of someone else. And as long as you can get the job done. So as long as a fireman has the equipment up and ready to be able to get to the fire, as long as the cop has his equipment up and ready and can get to. So as an example, in the Air Force, the landing gears on their fighter jets and bombers, it's now someone else's responsibility to make sure that it's good for them to be able to land after they take off.
yeah.
Taking off is not the problem.
Are you talking about outsourcing and leasing as
Yeah,
opposed to buying?
basically, yeah.
Is that an option for us?
We have certain restrictions on what we can do because we're a government entity. And we have looked into those type of options. Leasing, right, again, with the supply chain, maybe a few years ago, leasing might have been an option, but now leasing is not even an option. They don't allow you to even, and you know, they don't entertain it
There's nothing
because,
to lease.
right, because they don't have the inventory
Okay.
enough to actually want to do that. But generally, we keep our vehicles longer than, you know, and that's part of why we don't use the depreciation schedule either, is because we base it on the best practice of each individual type of equipment or vehicle on the replacement schedule and not necessarily how long it was depreciated out based on accounting rules. You know, so it might be, you know, it depreciated out maybe 6 or 7 years, but we keep it for 10, 11, or 12. Because of some of the vehicles, you know, although people drive around a lot, they don't rack up a lot of miles, you know, other than say the police cars. And so you could have a 10-year-old vehicle with less than 100,000 miles on it. And because of our maintenance schedule, it's still a vehicle that is in good working order that we don't need to replace yet.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big fan of get every last penny out of it.
Yeah, yep.
I just see that as an impending, as it relates to public safety.
Yep.
Right, as an impending fiscal cliff, much like what ASD's looking at, and I don't want to get there, so
Yeah, and
that's my big question.
yeah, we don't want to get there either.
Okay.
Yeah,
So what we
especially
did-
with that.
What we did with the government, with the federal government, was we put them on a schedule where, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's lease to own. So at the end of X number of years, title transfers for $1. And what that allowed the government to do was to use the lease payments as a way of budgeting and managing the budget over a 3-year, 5-year plan. So then at the end of the 5 years, title transfers for $1, and now you can keep, you know, if the equipment is still good, keep using it for another 15 years. But if the equipment needs to be upgraded, at least you're not worrying about, oh, now the cars are $100,000 each. They used to only be 10,000 2 years ago.
Yep.
And where are we going to find the 100,000 for the car?
Right.
So it helped a lot, and President Obama ended up implementing that those recommendations, and so now the military uses it as part of the normal course of business.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, thanks, everyone. And so I think we're going to move on to our next agenda item, but I think this is also a good example of something outside of the Munis annual budget cycle that the BAC can take on as a topic. So maybe this is a topic for a future meeting to kind of dig into this in more detail. And again, we can make recommendations, or we can dig into topics like this, again, outside of the budget cycles. And that's especially a great thing to do when we're, outside of the fall. So we could look at that for the winter as well. So thank you, everyone. With that, we'll move on to department assignments. And so this, I'll just give a brief overview because we have a couple new folks. So the BAC, one of the activities that we've done for several years now is split up the, as you saw in the budget document, there's a long list of departments. And so what we've been working on is we have each of us has a list of 3 departments, and then we've gone and been having budget meetings with the heads of those departments and whoever else they'd like to invite. So right now we're just doing a brief status update, but for I think Mark, you might be the only one who doesn't have assignments right now. But for,
So I can go home and relax.
No, it's fine, yeah. So we've been just meeting with those folks, and then the idea is, I think probably December, once we get past the budget cycle, we'll have some time on our agenda for folks to just share kind of, not a detailed list of every department, but kind of what you were hearing, things that are of interest, maybe things that we do want to dig into in the future. So I'll just check if folks have been able to been having their meetings, and if you've had any issues scheduling. Rachel, you mentioned you're still working on one of them, but.
Oh, he calls me when I'm available. I call him when he's not in. It's what it is. We'll keep trying.
Yeah, that's fair. And we have said this is not
It's
an urgent.
no wrongdoing on anybody's part. It's just like.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody else has had issues scheduling. It sounds like things.
I need to schedule, the report, but I'd like to see their annual report.
Okay.
Before that, so I can go through that and I can ask questions, and I save a lot of time.
Okay.
So if you could schedule that and have them give me, their annual report, I can go through all that in my time and be a lot more efficient.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And so folks would like assistance scheduling. Lila is the contact for that. So feel free to reach out. And all of the department heads know that they've been asked to do this. So people have been very responsive. So yeah, just keep at it. And then if you've done yours already, then thank you. And Mark, if you reach out to Lila as well, then we can look at which departments don't have somebody because they were either assigned to somebody who's left or just weren't assigned this year.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we'll continue with that. So next we'll move on to item 7, and Lila, if you could pull up the resolution as well. So this is, again, something we discussed last month conceptually, and we had a brief presentation from, I think it was from Mr. Dunbar, on the assembly action, which has actually already taken place on this. This is the proposed change to the property tax exemption, which, as I said, the assembly has voted, so it will be on the ballot for April 2023. And then we had a good discussion last meeting about, questions, the kind of policy choices here, and then, just giving information about what would change and the rationale for making this change. And so, I guess from there, now we've drafted a resolution for consideration, and then just to say, we can walk through it, but it essentially, again, because it's going to a public vote, we're not taking a position as a commission, but the therefore at the end basically says that the BAC supports putting this on the April 2023 ballot and having voters consider it. So I think in terms of discussion, I'll ask for a motion and a second to move the resolution, and then we can discuss and then take our vote. And that would include also any amendments and changes.
I so move to accept.
Seconded.
So we have a motion from Mr. Tamani and a second from Ms. Reese. And so and also I should say, we sent this out on Monday, I believe, by email, so we had a chance to read it. So we're looking at resolution AO 2020, or sorry, it's an unnumbered resolution from us. I believe it's the first or would be the only resolution we passed this year, so it'd be number one. Regarding AO 2022-75S, which is submitting to voters a ballot proposition approving an increase in the residential real property tax exemption. So first, I guess I'll ask, does anybody have questions on kind of the basics of it?
On this sixth whereas there at the bottom, is it the greater of, or the lesser of the 50,000 or up to 20%? Like 50,000 is the max, right?
Yes,
Should we make that clear?
up to a maximum $50,000 of value.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Or maximum 20%.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But that could be a minor amendment to say to specify the lesser of. Because I think you're right, it is whichever one is smaller.
So in other words, up to a minimum of 50,000 in value or a maximum of 20% of the assessed.
Yes, and that's current law. And Lila, if you don't mind scrolling down just to show that. Because I think the proposal itself, and maybe you can make it a little bit bigger. Next to the. Yeah, so essentially, as a reminder for folks, this was so the rules about residential property exemptions are set in state law, and so the maximum allowed in state law is 50,000. And so there was a bill passed this year that allows municipalities to increase that to 75,000 of assessed value. And this is again for residents, so living in your home. There's also a veteran and senior tax exemption; those are separate. So this is just any residents living in Anchorage in their own home. And the municipal policy that is currently in place that isn't related to the state law is this maximum of 20% of assessed value. And so that means if your home is more than, I guess, $250,000, then you could take that 50,000, that would be a maximum. If your home is less than that, then you would be limited to whatever that 20% of value is. And so there's two pieces proposed. One is increasing to allowing up to 75,000. So that helps anybody, who would be able to take more than 50,000. And then it also would change maybe you can scroll down just a little bit more. It would also change the city's percentage to allowing up to 40% of value. So that might be on page 2.
Yeah, I didn't see the 40% mentioned.
Oh, yeah, we might have missed that.
Well,
I think it's 50.
The 50, it says 50.
Well, yeah, so that whereas the intent was to say, because there was discussion at the assembly level, should we allow up to 100% or, what would the percentage be? And then of course, the larger the exemption, the more you would be shifting the tax responsibility to other payers, right? Because you give some people a break and there's not. And so the proposal that is on the ballot this year is 40%. So I think, yeah, this was a drafting error. I didn't catch it. It was a long month. So that's an amendment we can make as well. But the proposal that's going on the ballot is 40%. And that is in municipal code and can be, it's something that needs to be changed by the voters. It's not something that can just be voted on by the assembly, but it's a city thing, it's not a state thing. Sorry for the confusion there.
And so the folks that impacts where they're not able to access all of the $50,000, what's the assessed value threshold on that? They're going to be capped.
So it would change from 20% to 40%.
No, but like the home value where that cap hit, takes effect. I'm just saying, I think it's going to be a very small universe of people that would not be able to achieve, get the whole 75,000.
Yeah.
Based on, rising property values.
250,000.
So, yeah, so homes that are valued below 250,000 would be capped at that 40%.
Yes. And there was discussion about that too. So it was really the and I know the administration Sunday prepared multiple tables, kind of looking at where the math would go. But yeah, the discussion was that this would, help, it would disproportionately help folks who are under that home value threshold. So folks in condos or small homes or, so providing more, just more of a tax break for those folks.
I don't remember if it was ever stated. Is there an upper limit where you can no longer participate in your max out, or is it just a total of 4% of
Their assessed value.
Well, the cap is 75,000.
Yeah, so there's no home value where you're completely exempted. It's just,
Okay.
it becomes less valuable to you as you.
Totally missed.
Yeah. So I guess, we can discuss any amendments. It seems like so there was one. If you want to move the one about, or if you feel that we should change the wording on the, specifying the lesser of those two.
I mean, if it's clear to everyone else, that's, I understood that by inference, but I think it'd be helpful, but don't feel strongly about it, so.
Yes, so whereas the current allowable.
And what are we changing it to?
Well, it sounds like, I guess, I mean, if that's a question to the group, do folks want to add that? I think it would be a phrase, whichever is less, basically, after that word value. Or do we want to leave it as is?
It doesn't hurt to be specific there, and it's not a deal breaker.
Yeah, it would just be that the current allowable residential property tax exemption is a lesser of $50,000 or a maximum 20% assessed value.
Well, and we probably should follow the amendment process, so Lindsay, you want to?
Sure. I will move for an amendment to add the lesser of, to indicate that we were, it's for the lesser of, like, on that six, is it the sixth whereas?
Yeah. I second that.
Okay, and then is there any we'll just use objection for instead of doing, okay, no objection. Then we will amend it, so that's amendment 1. And then, see, because there was that other correction I need to make.
Percentage, the 50%.
Yeah, if you don't mind scrolling down.
Should it be up to, or do we not need the up to? 50,000.
Yeah, I think maybe we should leave up to, so we added the lesser of, and then, sorry, well, if you can, after the lesser of, put up to, I put in, yeah. Okay, and then if we scroll down, I believe the place to put it would be, well, I guess I'll do this. I will move, adding a whereas. It's essentially adding a whereas after the, or no, I'm sorry. Actually, now that I look at this again, the whereas that says increasing the allowed percentage of assessed value that may be exempted, I think, so I would move that we add the phrase after may be exempted, up to 40% of assessed value.
I have a question on that, whereas. Said increase the allowed percentage of assessed value that may be exempted. That's permissive to the option of whoever makes the decisions. I don't like that language. It says it may be.
So I understood that to be that, you don't automatically get this. I mean, you have to fill out a form and request it. So it's not like as a right, you have to assertively, affirmatively do something as a homeowner to request that to be applied.
Yeah.
I don't think there's like a real valuation. I don't think there's like a threshold or, but you have to turn in the form.
Yeah,
Is this tied to year-round residency?
I believe so. So let's take care of the first amendment and we want to make another amendment. So again, I move the amendment, adding where we're looking at right now, may be exempted, up to 40% of assessed value. And that's again, what is in the ordinance of yeah, it is an ordinance that the assembly passed to be put on the ballot. So that is what they had already decided. So do I have a second for that? Exactly. And any objection to that? Yeah, assessed value. Thank you. Okay, I hear no objection to that, so that's amendment 2. Al, did you want to?
No, that's fine, that's fine.
Okay. But yeah, you're right. This isn't discretionary on the part of the city. It's discretionary on whether the person applies for it. Okay. Is there any other discussion or amendments?
One last question. So whose assessed value is less than $800,000? So I think Rachel had asked if there was an upper limit, and I didn't think that there was, but does this mean that it's, if your home is valued at $850, is it different?
So this has less to do, it's not that somebody above that value can't access it. It's that, that when the assembly and the administration were basically doing the math of what the impacts are, then after 800,000, there is no, like you basically have maxed out so anything above that is that.
Is that 75,000?
Yeah.
That might be where my confusion came in.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, so basically they were showing that there is no benefit past that point. Or no additional benefit. And then, Layla, do you mind scrolling down one more time just to the four? Because again, you know, we discussed as a group, do we want to take a position on this as a policy, you know, all those things, and knowing that it is going to voters as well. And so this basically lays out the rationale for why it's being proposed, you know, the state law, the reason why it's being considered, and then essentially just says that we support this being put on the ballot. So it's not taking a position on the policy itself.
I would just like to see them define when they say should be used narrowly, because they're right. We're going to shift the tax burden. We're going to shift it right onto the taxpayer. Because those businesses aren't going to pay. They're going to raise their prices and we're all going to pay. So did it really benefit? And that's something for the voters to decide, but I would like to define narrowly.
Sure.
Especially with Alice concerned about permissible discretion.
Just gonna raise my prices, that's it.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
So I have a question. So this, you know, this whole process, like you know, we're still gonna get the same amount of tax revenue from the tax base. It's just that it shifts who pays what. But does it just shift the property tax bill among residential payers, or is it across the board, all property tax payers?
Yeah, and so what you'll see is it is the shift from residential to commercial.
So it's a net reduction to residential taxpayers. Okay.
Yeah, and I think what Jack had presented was $1 billion, I think, changes, but I'm not sure exactly. But I think that's what it was, is that the net of what these exemptions would shift in residential to commercial would be somewhere like $1 billion or 1.2 across that. But you are correct in that it is a shifting, it's not a reduction. You know, so the allowable amount for taxes doesn't change. You know, this is just shifting the cost between who pays for that and, you know, and who is now exempt.
And I remember, I guess, 2 other points from the work session, and these are, again, the assembly work sessions, not ours. But there was the discussion around this particular point was for 2023, of course, our all of our valuation and the mill rates are not set for 2023 until next year. And so what they were saying in 2022 is because home values went up so much, the mill rate actually did not. So people's taxes may have increased, but it's because of the valuation of their property, whereas the mill rate itself I think went down for a lot of folks, or at least was the same. And so it was speculative exactly how this would play out, because it really depends on those other factors. So it does still mean that there would be relatively less residential property tax liability essentially. in some
What it translates to really is that, say, someone who's retired, fixed income, staying at the same place, all of a sudden, now they have to pay more to live there.
Right.
Whereas now you're reducing that impact on that person. You know, the guy didn't do anything and all of a sudden, out of no fault of his tax rate has gone up.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so there is actually, there's a separate senior tax exemption, so that's certainly, but that is part of the rationale behind it.
Yeah.
And so for this too, I think the idea is, you know, if you look at folks whose home values would be smaller, it would be more likely to be first-time home buyers, folks with lower value homes or smaller homes, condos. And so the idea is, the idea with this was to be able to benefit those folks who are, you know, also likely to have lower income, just, I mean.
So they're thinking this might stimulate the home buying or just keep it steady?
I don't know that was discussed specifically, but it certainly is, I mean, it could be an incentive for folks to continue to occupy their home as a residence, right, instead of renting it out every day, things like that, so. But yeah, that was the discussion. So there was a lot of discussion back and forth, the pros and cons of this, that was in the work session.
Yeah, one quick point that I'd make is that a lot of people don't realize this, but property taxes overall are actually somewhat regressive. That usually,
Yeah.
you know, if you pay a bigger percent of your income, if you're lower income, because a lot of people below median income are homeowners still. So that is something I think that like these kinds of levers are one of the mechanisms that we have to make property taxes less regressive. So that's I think a point that I keep in mind for this type of thing.
Is there any other discussion or questions? In that case, do we feel ready for a vote? Okay, and so I will ask, and we'll just do a roll call vote, I guess, since we're all here in the room as well. So we'll go ahead and vote on the unnumbered resolution regarding property tax.
Ms. Brown,
I'll vote yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Ms. Hobson,
Yes.
Mr. Nolan,
Yes.
Mr. Clavin, sorry. Ms. Reese,
Yes.
Mr. Tamani,
Yes.
and Mr. Sam Panetta.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think we have like 2 or 3 members, not, anyway, we only voted in meeting, so right now, we have done email votes before, but we're not doing that right now. Okay, well then I think we consider this resolution passed, so thank you. So we'll get that posted on or get it signed and posted on the BAC website. And then also, I think our typical process, it's been a while since we've done a resolution, but we do also, I believe, transmit them to the assembly because they become part of their, just in the packet as a report. So any statement of the. So get that moving. And thank you, everybody, for your work on this. And again, if you do have questions and didn't have a chance to watch that work session, I encourage you because they walked through kind of all the pros and cons and why I ended up deciding that way. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. We were scheduled till 1 p.m. And so what's left on our agenda, we have audience participation. I don't see any audience here and I don't see anybody online from that. And then under BAC open discussion, so we have 2 items to take care of in terms of scheduling, and then we can also open up for any other comments or items of interest. The first one is we would like to schedule a work session of the BAC to go through the FY 2023 proposed budget. And I know a while ago we talked about Thursday, I'm going to put a date out, Thursday, October 27th, so 2 weeks from today is an option. And the purpose of that would be, we wouldn't be taking any action, but the whole work session would be to discuss the FY 23 budget. So folks have a chance to look through, however much detail you'd like to. We can ask questions. We can continue the discussion we started today. And so I think we're looking at, I was going to propose 11:30 to 1, our usual meeting time. And so just see if that works for folks.
I have that conflicts with the Alaska Bar Convention.
Okay. Another option we would have, we used to meet on the first Thursday, so the meeting after that, or the time after that would be November 3rd. That's another option. And I'm just looking at Thursdays, but we can also look at that. I don't know if that would work for you guys. Sure, that's good too. Make sure I'm not scheduling myself.
So I would suggest that now that we have these dates nailed down, whether it's November 3rd, for example, December 8th and 12th, if Leila, if you could go ahead and send out the invitation so I can put it in my calendar.
Yeah.
That would be great.
So does November 3rd work? Okay, yes, we'll plan on that 11:30 to 1, and I think in theory we'd be in this room, but then if we need to do, if there's room conflicts or anything, if nothing else, we can do Teams only. We'll assume it's here and on Teams. And then just to note, we had a note about our regular November meeting date, which is November 10th. Because there was the assembly moved one of their work sessions around budget amendments to that same date. But we were just confirming, their work session starts 1:30, so I don't believe it'll actually conflict with our meeting. So it was on the agenda as something we might do, but I would suggest we leave the time as is. So we'd be meeting Thursday, November 3rd, 11:30 for our work session, and then Thursday, November 10th for our.
Yeah, just send us an email.
Perfect.
Okay, sounds good. And then just to note as well, for the work session, please, review the budget. You don't have to read every page. It's like 600 pages, but please, take a look and dig in as much as you can, bring your questions. And then if there are, we'll want to start collecting recommendations. If we do want to pass a resolution that includes any specifics, then, we only have a week turnaround between those two meetings. So we just want to make sure we're thinking ahead to that. And if there are things where, again, we feel like we don't want to take a position or there's, disagreement as we get into it, and we're not obligated to do anything. It's really just how much information or how helpful we want to be as a group. So with that, with our last minutes, I'll just see if there are any other, under open discussion, other topics people want to bring up in the future. Are there things on your mind? Budget related questions. Yeah. Or just even questions. I know a lot of us are relatively newer, so this is also an opportunity to just, ask for information too.
I move to adjourn.
Okay, any objection to adjournment?
No.
Okay, not seeing any, then thank you everybody for being here.
Awesome. So, thanks to Mo, I've become very good friends. I don't even know that.
Yeah. Yeah.